The green room of American Forum buzzed with quiet energy. The walls were lined with framed photos of past guests, presidents, senators, activists. Under the bright studio lights, hair and makeup artists made final touches, but the real tension came from something no camera could see. Karoline Leavitt sat calmly in the corner, eyes sharp, hands folded on her lap. Her team whispered updates into her earpiece, but she didn't flinch. She wasn't nervous. She was focused. Just a few feet away, Michelle Obama stood in graceful silence. She wore a deep blue dress, elegant and commanding, and greeted the crew with a soft smile. Her presence was magnetic. Everyone noticed when she entered the room, and even more when she didn't speak. She was the kind of woman whose silence carried weight. But tonight wasn't about her past. It was about the future, and what was about to happen live on national television. Backstage, the producers spoke in hushed tones. The host, Laura Bennett, a veteran journalist known for her calm but piercing interviews, reviewed her cue cards with a sharp eye. She was known to keep control of the room, no matter how heated the conversation got. 30 seconds, someone called out. Karoline's team nodded. Her guest, Emma Sinclair, a rising conservative star, former federal prosecutor, and a close ally, adjusted her blazer. Unlike Karoline, Emma showed no emotion. She was cold, analytical, and utterly fearless. The countdown hit 0. The music began, and the lights came alive. Laura Bennett stepped onto the stage with her signature grace. Good evening, America. Tonight, on American Forum, we confront the growing divide in our nation, culture, identity, and the policies that shape our future. The applause was polite at first, but the air was charged. Camera 1 zoomed in on Michelle Obama as she took her seat. The audience clapped loudly, a standing ovation from the left side of the auditorium. Michelle waited for it to settle before speaking. When she finally did, her voice was warm, steady, and persuasive. America's strength comes from its diversity, she said. From our classrooms to our communities, we must teach not just facts, but compassion. Healthcare, education, and equality are not luxuries. They are rights. Her words flowed like poetry. The Democratic supporters cheered, some with tears in their eyes. Signs reading "Justice for All" rose from the crowd. Then Laura turned to the other side of the stage. Emma Sinclair, your response? Emma didn't blink. Mrs. Obama speaks of compassion, she said, her voice crisp and controlled. But what about the single mother who lost her home because of rising premiums? What about the workers who now can't afford insurance thanks to so-called affordable care? According to the Congressional Budget Office, Obamacare added $1.7 trillion to our deficit. Is that what compassion looks like? The mood shifted instantly. MAGA supporters in the crowd erupted in applause. Their signs, "Protect our families" and "Truth over talk," rose like a sea of red. Michelle's smile faded just slightly. Laura glanced between the two women, sensing the storm forming on set. Emma continued, her tone colder. Mrs. Obama, you tell stories of people helped by your policies, but millions were hurt. 30% of Obamacare spending went to bureaucracy, not patients. That's not reform. That's failure. Michelle sat straighter. Emma, numbers without people are just math problems, she replied. I met a veteran in Atlanta who survived cancer because of our program. That's a life saved. Emma didn't blink. And I met a factory worker in Ohio who had to borrow $20,000 just to treat his daughter's asthma. That's a life punished. We aren't against care. We're against corruption hidden in the name of compassion. The audience noise was deafening. Applause mixed with boos. The studio lights felt hotter, brighter. Social media lit up within minutes. Hashtags began trending. Leavitt vs. Obama, Charles American Forum Showdown, Haas Health War. Backstage, Karoline watched every second on the monitor. She didn't smile. She didn't blink. She waited. Laura leaned forward. Mrs. Obama, what do you say to those who feel betrayed by your administration's promises? Michelle took a breath. We didn't get everything right, but we gave hope. We gave people a chance. Emma leaned in. Hope doesn't pay bills, Mrs. Obama. Policy does. And your policies failed. The words cut deep. For a moment, the stage fell into silence. A rare silence on live television. Not even the audience breathed. That was the moment Karoline stood backstage, signaled her team, and stepped toward the curtain. The war of words wasn't over. It was just beginning. The studio's backstage corridor hummed with tension. Karoline Leavitt stood just beyond the curtain, her heels planted firmly on the polished floor. A production assistant gave her the signal, 2 fingers raised, a subtle nod. She inhaled slowly, stepped into the blinding light, and the crowd's noise shifted into something deeper. Anticipation. Laura Bennett, mid-sentence, noticed the movement and paused. Ladies and gentlemen, she announced, joining us now is Karoline Leavitt, senior conservative strategist and former White House communications advisor. The audience reacted like a bomb had gone off, cheers, jeers, and flashes from phones all at once. Karoline walked toward the panel table with a calm expression, nodding slightly at Michelle Obama and Emma Sinclair. She didn't glance at the crowd, not yet. She sat down, adjusted her mic, and waited for Laura to speak again. Karoline, Laura said, you've arrived just in time. Emma Sinclair raised serious challenges to the healthcare legacy of the Obama administration. What's your take? Karoline leaned into the mic, her voice cool and steady. The numbers speak, Laura, but more importantly, the people speak. I spent last week in Pennsylvania, talking to steelworkers. They don't quote policy. They talk about choosing between medicine and food. That's the legacy we're here to debate. Michelle Obama's gaze narrowed. Karoline, you've always been gifted with messaging, but messaging doesn't heal people. Policy does. And our administration tried to make healthcare a right, not a privilege. Karoline didn't blink. And it became a burden. Let's not pretend bureaucracy is benevolence. Your policies made it harder for small businesses to hire. Insurance premiums doubled. And you know what they say. When the middle class suffers, the elites host panels like this. The comment struck a nerve. Gasps from the audience. Laura held up a hand, urging calm, but it was clear control was slipping. Michelle replied, her voice firmer now. It's easy to criticize from the sidelines, but I walked into children's hospitals where parents thanked me. I met families who finally felt seen. That doesn't vanish because you spin a better line. Emma jumped back in. And how many families lost their doctors, Mrs. Obama? You promised, if you like your plan, you can keep it. That was a lie. It didn't happen. Millions were kicked off their plans. Do you call that leadership or deception? Michelle's smile was gone now. Her hands gripped the table. You call it deception. I call it imperfection in a broken system. But at least we tried to fix it. Karoline looked directly at her, eyes steady. Trying isn't enough when you leave people worse off. You built a system to sound good on paper but failed on the ground. That's not leadership. That's negligence. Laura cut in quickly, sensing the growing fire. Let's shift to cultural policy. Sex education in schools, transgender rights, parental control. Michelle, your view? Michelle sat straighter. Children should be safe, respected, and taught the full spectrum of humanity. Sex education isn't about ideology. It's about safety. Kids need to understand themselves and each other, not live in shame or fear. The liberal side of the audience applauded wildly, but Karoline was already leaning forward. Safety doesn't mean confusion, she said sharply. Parents have a right to know what their kids are being taught. We're not against education, we're against indoctrination. Teaching a 9-year-old about gender theory without parental consent isn't progress. It's a violation. Michelle's voice rose. It's education, Karoline. And kids who feel seen are kids who thrive. We've lost too many to bullying, isolation, and silence. And we've lost the classroom to activists, Karoline shot back. This isn't about safety anymore. It's about reshaping children into political pawns. We say protect kids. You say transform them. That's the real debate. The crowd erupted again, shouting from both sides, banners raised, phones live streaming. The chaos. The producers signaled to Laura for a break, but Laura didn't move. She turned to the camera instead. This is American Forum. What began as conversation has become confrontation. But this is democracy in its rawest form. We'll be back after the break. The lights dimmed, but the fire didn't. Backstage, staff scrambled. Texts flew across. Political circles and news anchors across the country prepared emergency segments. What had started as a panel on policy was now a political earthquake. Karoline turned to Emma and whispered just one sentence. They weren't ready for truth. Let's give them more. The break lasted 4 minutes, but to the people in the studio, it felt like 30 seconds of silence wrapped in dynamite. No one left their seat. Even backstage, producers whispered into headsets with military precision. The country wasn't watching a debate anymore. It was watching a battle for the national soul. As the cameras went live again, Laura Bennett's voice returned like a drumbeat. We're back on American Forum, where emotions are high and the stakes are even higher. Tonight we're asking hard questions. Not just about policy, but about who we are as a nation. The studio lights brightened. Michelle Obama sat slightly forward, arms crossed, jaw tight. Karoline Leavitt, beside her ally Emma Sinclair, was calm. Too calm. A political storm was coming, and she looked ready to walk through it untouched. Laura faced Michelle. Mrs. Obama, let's talk about identity politics and social justice. You've been a major voice for inclusion, but critics say that voice has turned divisive. How do you respond? Michelle straightened, her tone measured. What they call division, I call visibility. I've spoken for women who had no voice, for children in marginalized communities who grew up believing they didn't matter. That's not division. That's America growing up. Emma tapped her microphone, her voice cutting in like a blade. Or is it America breaking apart? You talk about visibility, but millions now feel invisible in their own country, silenced if they don't fit the narrative. Michelle turned slowly. That's not silence, Emma. That's discomfort. Progress doesn't feel like a hug. It feels like truth walking into the room. Karoline smirked. And what truth are we talking about? That boys should compete in girls' sports? That history must be rewritten in classrooms to shame kids for the color of their skin? You call it progress. We call it confusion. We call it chaos. The conservative crowd clapped and shouted. The liberal audience responded with boos and signs reading, "Truth is inclusion." The temperature in the room climbed by the second. Laura raised a hand. Let's bring this to foreign policy. Karoline, many say the previous administration, which you served, isolated us from allies. Michelle, your husband's administration, focused on diplomacy and alliances. Where's the balance? Karoline leaned forward, her voice low and sharp. Alliances are worthless if they cost us strength. Obama apologized for America. Trump reminded the world who we are. Power doesn't come from dinner parties with Europe. It comes from standing alone if necessary. Michelle fired back, her voice rising for the first time. That kind of thinking gets soldiers killed. Diplomacy isn't weakness. It's wisdom. The world respected us because we didn't bully our way through global affairs. We led with dignity. And walked on, Emma added. You handed pallets of cash to Iran. You ignored rising threats in Asia. You gave speeches while our enemies made moves. Michelle didn't blink. And what did you give them? Threats? Tweets? Isolation? America can't lead the world from a bunker. Karoline's face didn't move, but her eyes burned with quiet rage. Better a bunker than a glass house built on broken promises. Gasps, whispers. The crowd didn't know whether to clap or recoil. Even Laura's hand trembled slightly as she flipped her next card. But before she could speak, Michelle turned to Karoline directly, dropping the pretense of performance. You can twist words. You can drop numbers and slogans. But do you know what it feels like to sit with a mother who lost her child to a preventable disease? Do you know what it's like to tell her that her child might have lived if she lived in the right zip code? Karoline paused. Her voice lowered, more deliberate now. Yes, I do. And I also know what it's like to sit with a father who lost his home because of your regulations. To stand at a food bank and see former teachers and small business owners waiting in line. You talk about lives saved. I talk about lives destroyed in silence. The words echoed. For a moment, neither side knew how to react. The pain was real. On both sides. Laura's voice finally broke the silence. This is the America we're living in. 2 visions, 2 stories. Both filled with truth. Both scarred by cost. Behind the scenes, phones buzzed. Clips from the broadcast were already trending. Headlines formed in real time. Leavitt takes on Obama. Forum explodes in live clash. 2 Americas face off. But inside the studio, it wasn't about headlines anymore. Karoline looked at Michelle and asked one question that made the room lean in. Would you bet the next generation's future on the same dream that's already failed the last one? Michelle didn't answer right away. And that silence was louder than any applause. The silence stretched across the studio like a tightrope, thin, fragile, and ready to snap. Michelle Obama looked down at her hands, then slowly raised her gaze to meet Karoline Leavitt's eyes. For the first time since the forum began, there was no smile on her face, only resolve. I don't bet on dreams, she said slowly, her voice barely above a whisper, but powerful enough to cut through the tension. I invest in them. Her words landed softly, but they carried weight. The audience, for a moment, seemed unsure how to react. Then came cautious applause from the liberal side, matched by the folding arms and skeptical stares from the MAGA crowd. Karoline didn't blink. She leaned in, elbows on the table. Then, what was the return on that investment? You promised transformation. You promised unity. But all we got was division, economic decline, and a culture war we're still bleeding from. Michelle remained still, but her fingers curled inward, forming a light fist. Laura Bennett watched them both, sensing that she no longer needed to steer the conversation. This wasn't a show anymore. It was history unfolding in real time. Just then, Emma Sinclair, Karoline's ally, flipped open a folder in front of her and pulled out a paper. If I may, she said, holding it up to the camera. This is a report from the Government Accountability Office. It confirms that under the Obama-era health reforms, over 30% of allocated community healthcare funds were spent on administrative costs. That's nearly $100 billion wasted. Murmurs rolled through the crowd like a low tide. Emma continued, and while the media framed the Affordable Care Act as revolutionary, millions were forced to change their doctors, pay higher premiums, or settle for coverage that didn't meet basic needs. Mrs. Obama, is that the dream you're proud of? Michelle's jaw tightened. No policy is perfect, but tell me, what's your alternative? Let the market decide? Let people fall through the cracks unless they can afford to be saved? Karoline jumped in. No, we want a system that values efficiency, not emotion, one that rewards innovation, not bureaucratic bloat. Americans don't need more slogans, they need results. The MAGA crowd erupted in applause. But Laura saw something the cameras didn't. Michelle's right hand gripped the edge of the table. Her nails dug into the wood. Michelle looked up slowly. You know what I've learned, Karoline? That real change doesn't come from power plays. It comes from patience. From doing the hard work that doesn't always fit into a headline or a tweet. And that kind of work, lifting people up, isn't always loud. Sometimes it's invisible, but it matters. Karoline smirked. Invisible or ineffective? The line hit hard. Michelle didn't respond. But then, unexpectedly, someone from the audience stood up. A man in his late 50s, wearing a veteran's cap and holding a folded flag. "I served in Afghanistan," he said, voice cracking but clear. "I came home with cancer from burn pit exposure. I couldn't afford treatment until the ACA gave me coverage. That policy didn't feel invisible to me. It saved my life." The room went quiet. Michelle slowly nodded in his direction. Karoline's face didn't change, but her hands tightened slightly. Another woman stood up, this time from the other side of the aisle. "My husband lost his job because of small business regulations tied to that same law. We lost our house. I'm not saying everything was bad, but don't act like everyone was saved." The forum was no longer a stage. It was a national confessional. Laura stepped forward. "This is America. These are the lives behind every policy. Tonight, we're not just watching a debate. We're witnessing the divide that defines our politics." Backstage, producers were receiving breaking news alerts. One of Karoline's top advisors had just leaked a draft of a new GOP healthcare plan, codenamed Patriot Care, to conservative outlets. The document promised private competition, state autonomy, and massive federal cuts. The timing wasn't accidental. Karoline's team was preparing for war, not just with Democrats, but with the legacy of Obama himself. Michelle's phone buzzed, under the table. Her assistant glanced at the screen, lips tightening. Foreign press had picked up the debate. The BBC headline read, "America's Identity War Goes Primetime." Michelle looked at Laura. "If we keep using people as statistics," she said, "we will never heal. We'll just keep finding new ways to hurt each other." Karoline shot back, "And if we keep ignoring numbers, we'll lose this country," while telling bedtime stories. Emma leaned in toward her mic one last time. "This isn't about healthcare anymore. It's about what kind of country we want. One ruled by feelings, or one driven by truth." The tension was so thick it hung like fog. Laura turned to the camera, voice steady. "And that is where we'll begin our final segment. After the break, we'll talk about power. Who has it, who lost it, and who's coming for it next." The lights dimmed. The break began, and somewhere, in the silence, a line had been crossed. The stage returned from break under colder lights. The cheers had dimmed, replaced by a heavier energy, as if everyone in the studio understood something had changed. No longer just a televised debate, the American forum had become the fault line of a nation's political soul. Every word now carried weight. Every glance threatened to tip the balance further. Karoline Leavitt sat like a statue, spine straight, eyes sharp. Her ally, Emma Sinclair, whispered something into her ear, a tight phrase neither the cameras nor the microphones could catch. Across the stage, Michelle Obama sipped water, her expression unreadable, her silence louder than any argument. Laura Bennett stood at center stage, no longer just a host. She was the only force keeping chaos from breaking loose. "We've heard the numbers," she said carefully. "We've heard the stories. Now let's talk about power, how it's used, how it's abused, and who holds it today." She turned first to Michelle. "Mrs. Obama, the criticism against your husband's administration includes accusations of elite policymaking disconnected from working Americans. Do you believe the Obamas still speak for the people?" Michelle straightened her back. "Barack and I never claimed to be perfect, but we listened. We built policy through compassion and consultation. The ACA, the education reforms, they came from town halls, from community organizers, from the ground up. This idea that we ruled from ivory towers is a myth. We were raised by working-class families. We lived the struggle. Karoline leaned in, her voice low but cutting. You lived it, maybe. But then you left it behind. A hush swept over the audience. You talk about compassion, but during the Obama years, 5 million people lost their homes to foreclosures. Wages stagnated. Bureaucracy bloomed while real families suffered. Karoline continued. You didn't just lose touch. You built an entire political class around staying out of touch. Michelle's lips pressed into a thin line. Her calm held, but her fingers curled again. Laura pivoted to Emma. Ms. Sinclair, you've been critical of what you call performative politics. What does that mean exactly? Emma didn't hesitate. It means dressing up failure in nice language. It means pushing identity over integrity. The American people are tired of speeches that sound beautiful and fix nothing. Tired of politicians crying on stage while ignoring inflation, crime, and open borders. Then she turned directly to Michelle. You said you wanted to lift people up, but lifting should start with truth. And the truth is, your party abandoned the working class for campus slogans and media narratives. Michelle finally spoke. It's easy to talk about truth when it's your version, but the numbers tell their own story. Under Obama, the unemployment rate dropped from 10% to under 5%. The stock market tripled. Bin Laden was brought to justice. Are those failures? Karoline fired back. And under Trump, we saw record low unemployment, especially for minorities. Millions lifted out of poverty. Manufacturing rebounded. You say hope. We say results. A voice from the control booth sounded in Laura's earpiece. Foreign media are splicing clips already. This is going global. The camera cut to a split screen. Michelle on one side, Karoline on the other. 2 visions of America. 2 different languages, both in English. Suddenly, an alert flashed on the teleprompter. A leak had just hit social media. It was a clip. Off-air footage from earlier that evening. Someone had secretly recorded Michelle Obama in the green room, looking down at her phone and saying, "They're going to try and make me the villain tonight. Watch." The video spread like wildfire. Karoline's digital team saw it instantly. Emma's assistant mouthed, "Let it run." Within minutes, hashtags trended. Villain tonight. And Michelle unfiltered. Leavitt truth. Michelle was told about the leak during a brief backstage whisper. Her face didn't change, but her voice did. I knew this would happen, she said on air. That's why I came prepared. Because we are in a war of perception now. Not just facts, not just policy, perception. She reached into a file beside her seat and pulled out a page. This is an internal DNC memo, she said quietly. It's real, and it states that one of our biggest risks heading into the next election is losing the narrative on economic justice. Not policy, narrative. That's what politics has become. Karoline's brow rose slightly. Michelle didn't blink. You want to win the country with tweets. I want to save it with truth, even when it's hard, especially then. Emma leaned in again. Then why hide behind closed-door memos? Why wait until tonight to show us this truth? Michelle paused. Because until now I believed you were arguing in good faith, she said. But now I see. This isn't about helping Americans. It's about breaking anything that still works just to prove you can. The MAGA crowd hissed. One supporter shouted, "Sit down, Michelle." But she didn't sit. She stood. And across the screen, the words, "Live Breaking," lit up. Laura turned to the camera. Ladies and gentlemen, the American Forum has just received confirmation that a federal investigation into healthcare lobbying practices tied to both Democratic and Republican donors is opening tonight. Gasps filled the studio. Michelle's eyes met Karoline's. The message was clear. The real fight had just begun. The studio fell into a sudden, eerie quiet. The words, "federal investigation," still echoed in the minds of everyone present. A camera operator froze mid-pan. Laura Bennett, usually in full control, blinked once, twice, processing the news just fed into her earpiece. Behind her, producers scrambled, screens lighting up with incoming headlines from CNN, Reuters, and The Hill. Karoline Leavitt didn't move. She sat still, her eyes trained on Michelle Obama like a hawk studying a rival. Michelle remained standing, her hands calmly resting on the edge of the desk, but her jaw was tight now. This wasn't just a debate anymore. It was the beginning of a political earthquake. "Ladies and gentlemen," Laura said slowly, turning to the audience and the millions watching at home, "we have confirmed that the Department of Justice has opened a bipartisan inquiry into healthcare lobbying during both the Obama and Trump administrations. Names have not yet been released, but sources suggest both parties may be implicated." Gasps swept through the crowd. Even the MAGA section, previously roaring with applause, fell silent. Michelle glanced at Laura, then turned her eyes toward Karoline. "You were waiting for this, weren't you?" she asked. Her tone wasn't accusatory, just knowing. Karoline gave a slow smile, cold and deliberate. "No. But I knew something would break eventually. The truth always leaks, even when it's buried under 10 layers of legacy and lies." Michelle exhaled through her nose, then looked straight into the camera. "To the American people, if I or my husband are named in that report, I welcome the investigation. No one is above the law. Not me, not him, not Karoline, not Trump. Let justice do its work." The audience stirred again, this time unsure whether to applaud or hold their breath. But Karoline wasn't done. She leaned forward, her voice quieter now, more intimate, like she was telling a secret to the nation. "Let's not pretend this is just about legal names in a report. This is about the system, the donors, the hidden memos, the consultants who write the speeches, and the lobbyists who write the laws. You say no one is above the law, but what about the people who make the laws behind closed doors?" Emma Sinclair stepped in, her voice clear. "For years, we've allowed elites from both parties to smile for the cameras while cutting deals in the shadows. But the American people are watching now. And we're not going back to sleep." Laura tried to pivot. "Let's remember, this is not a courtroom. These are allegations." Karoline interrupted, her voice laced with iron. "No, this is exactly what it is. A courtroom in public. And the jury isn't here. It's out there. Watching. Taking notes. Voting." The audience erupted. On one side, cheers and shouts of "Drain the Swamp" and "Leavitt 2028" filled the air. On the other side, stunned silence mixed with murmurs of disbelief. Michelle turned slowly, lifting a single sheet of paper from her file. "You want transparency?" she asked. "This is a donation record from 2015. A PAC tied to a pharmaceutical giant funneled $1.2 million to Senate Republicans. That same year, they received a tax loophole extension buried in a healthcare reform package. The bill passed. Nobody blinked. Nobody cared. Karoline didn't flinch. And how many of your own candidates took money from that same PAC the next year?" Michelle didn't answer. She didn't need to. Emma looked toward the audience. "This is the problem. We argue about who's worse when the truth is, they're all playing the same game." At that moment, the live broadcast screen glitched, just for a second, but long enough for producers to panic. Then came a voice, not from the stage, but from backstage, a whistleblower named David Rowe, a former staffer under Obama's Department of Health and Human Services. He had been quietly invited for a post-show segment, but someone leaked his feed live. "The entire system is rigged," his voice boomed. "I saw the data. I helped bury some of it. The same companies who lobbied Democrats also wrote entire sections of Trump's rollback bills. This isn't about parties. It's about power." Security moved fast, but the damage was done. His face filled the screen. His voice became unavoidable. Karoline didn't smile. She just whispered to Emma, "Now it begins." Michelle sat down slowly, not defeated, just aware. Laura tried to regain control, her voice thin. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have to take a short break." But the truth was, the break had all. The cameras came back from commercial, but everything felt different now. The set of American Forum was no longer just a talk show stage. It had become a national front line. Live feeds poured in from all over the country. Cable networks picked up the stream. Social media was in chaos. Hashtags like Tanarin Forum Reckoning and Leavitt vs. Obama were trending worldwide. Laura Bennett stood in the center of it all, trying to project calm. But her voice trembled slightly as she addressed the nation. "We are witnessing something truly unprecedented. Tonight was supposed to be a debate on culture and healthcare policy. It has now become a historic confrontation, one that could reshape Washington." Karoline Leavitt and Michelle Obama sat across from each other again, no longer sparring like politicians, but watching each other like survivors of a political storm. Between them, the truth lay raw and exposed. Emma Sinclair, the sharp and fearless conservative rising star, leaned forward and broke the silence. "This isn't about winning anymore," she said. "It's about exposing the machinery behind every smiling face and polished speech. People are angry not because they lost faith in politicians, but because those politicians stopped being afraid of them." Michelle didn't argue. For the first time that night, she looked genuinely shaken. Not out of guilt, but recognition. The game had changed. The audience had woken up. A voice from the audience cut through the tension. A man in his 40s stood up, holding a photograph. "My wife died waiting for insurance approval," he said, his voice cracking. "She voted for you, Mrs. Obama. She believed in you. But she still died. And I don't know who to blame anymore." Michelle stood slowly. "I'm so sorry for your loss," she said sincerely. "I fought for reforms. But I see now. Maybe we didn't fight hard enough." Karoline didn't smile. She looked at the man and nodded once. "You deserve answers, and we're going to get them." Suddenly, the auditorium lights dimmed, not because of a power failure, but as part of a pre-planned moment. Laura turned toward the camera. "We have a surprise final segment tonight. We've just received the unredacted internal documents from the whistleblower's legal team. These include private communications between major lobbying firms, lawmakers, and executive staff across both administrations. We are releasing them live now." The screen behind them flashed to life. Emails, memos, meeting minutes, a message. Dated 2013. "Ensure the ACA clause includes our provision. No pushback from WH expected." Another from 2018. "Repeal bill wording approved. Senator's staff already looped in. Expect pharma bonus." Names were named, amounts listed, connections drawn. The room exploded, not with applause or outrage, but with stunned, exhausted silence. The kind that comes when illusions finally shatter. Michelle turned to Karoline. "You wanted to bring the house down," she said quietly. "Now what?" Karoline stood, her voice unwavering. "Now we build something better, in the open, with the people watching every step." Emma joined her. "Let both parties clean house. No more dynasties, no more untouchables." Laura stepped forward, trying to close the show, but her usual polish was gone. "I don't know what happens after tonight," she said, her voice raw. "But I do know this. America just changed." Backstage, security teams were on high alert. Phones rang non-stop. Several lawmakers reportedly left their homes under protection. News anchors across the country scrambled to rewrite their scripts. This wasn't just a media event. It was a constitutional moment. As Karoline exited the stage, reporters swarmed her. "Are you running for president?" one asked. She stopped for a second, thought, then said, "If I do, it won't be for a party. It'll be for the truth." Michelle walked past her, eyes meeting for just a second. "I don't like your methods," Michelle said softly, "but maybe the fight was overdue." Karoline nodded. It was, and it's only just begun. The broadcast ended, but millions stayed glued to their screens, unable to sleep, unable to look away. They had seen something few expected. Two powerful women, from opposing worlds, forced into the same reality. One legacy challenged, another legacy born. And somewhere deep in Washington, as classified files were unlocked and legal teams scrambled, the real war began, not between left and right, but between the system and those finally ready to break it.